time? Good? Okay, so mine was on a math test and a literacy test for second grade. So here's the context for my first data set. It was given to second graders. It was used with a rubric, so basically the students had a passage and they were to read that out loud, and she scored them in these 4 categories, each worth 5 points for a total of 20, which made my job really easy for collecting data. The 5 categories that then I took their data from and put them into was score out of 20, fluency score out of 5, vocab score out of 5, pronunciation out of 5, and then link topic to discussion for 5 points. Her intent while having the students read this was to be able to read it. There were certain vocab words that they were able to pick up on, and if they pronounced it wrong, that was like a separate category, and then on top of that, then they had a discussion, and most students did well in the discussion, which was kind of good because I think it was kind of a gimme for that 5 points for students, because most are able to talk about what they just read to her and feel comfortable enough, especially in that one-on-one. So the B and C, which was step-by-step, and then the methods to my madness. So my step-by-step, I took students' names off and I put them with a number. I also kept that number the same for both reading and math. My thought process being that I would be able to compare students, because some kids are math brain, some are reading brain. It shows where they're passionate about. So I kind of wanted to be able to compare that, which you'll see down the road. I looked at areas where kids were succeeding, and then I noticed trends on where students were falling off as a whole class, kind of which ones we were scoring in lower. I then took the graphs and created a graph with the top line being, and you'll see this later, the top line being the whole class score out of 20, and then underneath it being each category separate. I wanted to do that to be able to tell, okay, well they scored high here. How come their score's low? Okay, sweet, we'll go to vocab. All they didn't do is great during vocab. And then method to my madness, I thought that these categories made it really easy to break down into, which was kind of nice. And then it was easy to score out of 5. They are second graders, so it's kind of tough. They don't do many tests, but I was really fortunate because I kind of like had my eye out ready to go for this rubric. Students did well in other categories versus others. And then the graph type I chose was a line graph, and I kept that consistent. I had feedback from the last peer session that was asking to do different types of graph. I decided to just do line graphs because I wanted that consistency between both the math and the reading and all the sets. So you wouldn't have to look at it and say, okay, well I'm doing a bar graph now, what's this showing? I want it to be very, you can tell what this student scored in this section compared to their actual score, and then it showed the whole class pattern as well as their track with that category. So here's my chart. The first line, this blue line, is the class score out of 20, and then each line, which, like I said, I broke down into separate graphs because this looks kind of jargony when you first look at it. You can kind of start to see patterns of, okay, well these students did well, they did well in most categories. This student did low, okay, well they kind of did low in the other categories. So like I said, this one's really jargony, which made sense for me to then take each category and compare it to the whole class score. The next 4 lines, like I said, show each category, and it was nice because on Google, when you do the data points, when you hover over a student, it shows the score, click, score, vocab, they got a 2 out of 5, which was super nice because if you think about it from a data perspective, when you're in your classroom, that's what you're going to be using instead of, oh, well, I'm not really sure how to gauge this or who's what. So then what I analyzed for this presentation was our lowest score was the vocab score. So what I did was I looked at it as who would be kind of our higher achievers, who would be our middle achievers, who would be our lower achievers. And then I looked at vocab areas where the whole class needed to be kind of, there's 2 words that I noticed that they were really struggling with. So then those would be ones to go back around and recap on. And this, like I said, was the lowest category. I then grouped it by students, specifically 2, 4, 11, 17, and 19 need more support, 3, 10, 12, 18, 21 need moderate support, and then 5, 9, 13, 14, 15, 16, 20, got it, they're ready to move on. And for this specific class, I would like to mix them in and then set up individual conferences where with the needs more support, I would want that support given to them really extensive, The middle ones, I'd really want to have that conversation of, okay, you're missing barely on this part. What can I do to help you benefit? And then my higher achievers, I'd want them to set a goal that they can surpass. But with each student, I'd want them to have a post-test goal. And like I said, I'd interweave who's got it, who's middle, who's high. So my second data set was math. Same thing, given second graders based off of a rubric. 5 problems per category, 4 categories. So same thing, out of 5 points, which made it really easy to record. 4 categories, 5 points each. Total category at the end was worth 20. Super easy for me. It was subtracting 2s, subtracting 3s, adding 3-digit numbers, and then subtracting 3-digit numbers. Took the same process, took all the students, put them into data, used those same numbers from the data set before, so then I, like I said, could compare math versus reading. Did the same procedure for both, and I wanted to create goals in like the next step for a lesson. And I did the same thing, like I said, I wanted to be able to compare the line graphs through both. So here's the results. You can kind of see where we've got it, where we don't got it. What I really liked about this was that it showed that adding 2s right off the bat when I created this graph, I was like, sweet, they have got it. Adding 2s, we can move on. Adding 3s, we have a few. But are they kind of ready to move on with a couple retouching? Yes. The next 2 categories were subtracting 3 and adding 3-digit numbers, which was where they struggled the most as a whole class, which demonstrated to me that they need altogether more support. So then taking that data, I was able to look at our lowest one, like I said, was 3-digit numbers, with not that many students having a 5 out of 5 score, which shows you that the whole class needs to recap through it. So for this specifically, I would take each group based off of our highs, middles, and lows and do separate instruction for each, because the ones who are ready to move on, they scored 5s in every category, so they don't really need to workshop that for math. They're ready to move on and be challenged, and I think math is one that you can really push kids. And same thing, I'd want to really have that one-on-one of what can I do to help you with your 3-digit adding, your 3-digit subtracting. And then with our kids who are ready to move on, I'd be moving on to, okay, where does this relate to real life? How can we include this in modern day in your daily life? Have those 3 groups, have those conferences, set up goals. I think goal setting in both is really important to me, because then it's tangible and then they know what they're aiming for. So my reflection, I think that the literacy test, some of the categories were kind of difficult for me to be like, what's the difference between their pronunciation and their vocab? Because if they don't know it, how are they going to pronounce it correctly? So some of that I kind of thought through of how I want to implement it in my classroom. With math, we do a lot of really different word problems during the week, so then I felt like that was hard to then throw them this test. So again, it makes you think back to what I would do in my classroom, and you kind of learn the bits and pieces of what you would want to do. Comparing the data, you can tell that certain kids do great in some categories and are lacking in other, which shows that maybe they just need to figure out a way of reading about a math specialist, or how you interweave both to make it where they can have success in their strong points. So I found that really interesting when comparing math to reading. There's definitely kids who are like, oh, they did so great on reading, and then, oh, not so great on math. Okay, sweet, what can I do to benefit them in those groups and in those one-on-ones to help them set goals? And on that one, I went into like specific, this kid did great in this kid did great in this makes sense because, but we won't share that. So my personal reflection, which was different from the data reflection, was that I wish I would have taken pictures of the rubrics and tests. I didn't really do that, and I wish I would have. So now I can relate that back to my classroom. I invested time into creating those 5 graphs per data set. So then that's 10 graphs total, and that was just kind of a lot because some of them, like, I obviously didn't use, but it was good practice. But overall, I don't know if I would do that again. I would have picked lowest, and then the first one I did that had all of them combined. I liked using the numbers instead of using like an alias for each, because then it made me easy to like group them really quickly and use the data towards that instead of it being more difficult on me. I also liked comparing the math to literacy, because those are the kind of the 2 big categories that they really reflect in their daily classroom, and then that makes it so you can analyze the 2. And I liked thinking about why I would include these groups I would like to mix the levels, and then these groups I would like to separate them out. It was like conscious, and it was kind of nice to think through that. So that's it. Sorry to talk fast. It was a lot of data.
That was a lot.
Yeah. And I'm a fast talker. Sorry.
You did a good job.
The bar's kind of high.
Sorry.
Oh, let me stop this.